Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about big ideas and current events. We explore the connections and causes of our lives in a broken world, and we dig into what's really true as we reshape the focus of our lives. Today, we're going to talk about feminine glory. This is Mike's interest and my own, but also
That sounded funny to
we
say
want to
that
start.
way.
I know, right? Mike's interest in feminine glory. But Mike, you were just bringing up a concept that I wanted to cover, which was have we really been true to our title of On Second Thought, specifically in our conversation about Asbury?
Well, yeah, it made me think of the Asbury one because I thought it was a good episode. But what I realized, looking at something online after that, some other topic, and I had an immediate set of thoughts, and I thought about including it for a future episode. But I thought, wait a minute, is this just a reaction or is it truly a second thought?
Yeah.
A filtering through, giving some assessment, giving some time to weigh out things. And I just thought, you know what? And that made me think about the Asbury episode. How much did we respond? How much did we assess?
Yeah.
And bring what maybe some element of gifts that you and I possess as individuals to a topic. And I thought we did okay. But I think what it made me realize is, okay, Mike, I want to make sure that we're just keep fighting for that level in a sense. Not level,
Yeah.
that's not the right word, but that continued sense of we don't want to just respond to things that happen. We don't want this to become just responses because we
Yeah.
want to be, if we're faithful to the things that have been given to us, we want to be people that respond but then reflect upon it. What does this mean in the bigger picture?
Sure.
So,
Well, one of the advantages I've had in the last few days is getting invited to tell people about it because there's a
Yeah.
lot of people in
it
churches
forces
in
you
our
to
area.
think over it a bunch.
Yeah, so I was invited to a little country church here outside of Scio, and I'm sitting there during the music, and I have a coffee cup in my hand, right? Because every church needs coffee in the back. And on the lid, I'm writing down like, okay, what am I really going to share?
yeah.
And so actually, I was like, oh, I could bring the cup up and read my notes. It was perfect.
Yeah.
But it forced me to think, okay, step one, both of our journey, like what were the phases of our journey, but also each of them created a takeaway. So like worship was the centerpiece, we felt.
So like, yeah.
And then from that worship and came prayer and the altar calls and humility.
Yeah.
Right. And then from
Yes,
that
this is what
prayer,
I'm talking about. This is further reflection.
yeah. And so from that prayer, we really tried to develop, or we're now as leaders in our church, trying to develop strategies to say, okay, if God is going to begin to do something significant,
Yeah.
what do we need to do differently?
Yeah.
Especially around sharing the gospel with people.
Yeah.
And in our case, we're emphasizing small groups
Yeah.
and prayer and bringing it back to the beginning of like, okay, we begin back to that humble worship. Like, how are we cultivating humble worship?
Yeah.
How does that worship then inspire more prayer for the lost,
Yeah.
people who are broken and
Yeah.
captive, not just to like dysfunction and immorality, but also spiritual darkness. I mean,
Yeah.
it's rampant,
Yeah.
especially among kids. And so we're seeing that move of God begin among the youth of our church.
Now,
Trying to spread that out.
throw in what you said earlier before we were on. Is this on camera or on audio or on tape or what phrase? I don't know what phrase, but before we were live here or recording, sensitive versus manipulative.
Yeah.
Say what you meant by that? Because I think it relates to strategies, for example.
Yeah. So, well, there's always a concern, and I've heard this conversation, and we've had it when you're leading a church and deciding what songs or how the things should be arranged. Are we trying to? And the accusations come around. Are we trying to manipulate people into like I saw a TV special out of England where a hypnotist convinced a crowd of people that he was a Christian revival preacher, and people were falling down in the spirit and all the things. And then at the end, he said, "Actually, I'm an atheist, and I
had an axe to
hypnotized you.
grind,
And it's all fake."
Yeah.
And it was like, dude, that's
Yeah.
about as dark as you can get.
Yeah.
But it also brings into stark relief this idea that how much are we tempted
Yeah.
to take into our own hands
Yeah.
what God wants to do versus saying, well, if we put this song here, it's jarring.
Yeah.
You're just trying to be sensitive to how people would respond who just want to enjoy and think deeply about who God is and where they sit with him and That's what church is for.
Yeah, yeah. And there's clearly, and then this is all, I always view it as this. We operate at a human level because it's all we can do. But there's another sense in which we have to maintain an openness if God intrudes himself.
Right, right.
And when he does, first of all, you don't want your human activities to be so sacred that they can't change. But second, what is this thing that's happening and how do we run with it? Right? How do we put the sails up to catch this wind where
Yeah.
it's going?
Well, there's so many sail metaphors. Surfing has been the metaphor I've heard. I've said and heard someone else. I remember trying to surf, and I was telling the church this morning. The first few times I tried to surf, and every time, I always struggled to catch a wave
Yeah.
because I don't do it enough that my arms aren't
Yeah.
strong enough to gain the
Quick.
speed it requires to then get the wave.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I said, okay, so our job now, feeling this
Yeah.
beginning, is saying, how are we strengthening
That's a good way to
our
do it.
structures of our church, our leadership, our integrity,
Yeah.
to be ready
Yeah.
so the wave doesn't just pass under you.
Yeah.
And we
yeah.
missed it.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so here's a question, because I said one of the things I also said was that God has the gas pedal, but we have a brake, and we
Okay.
can resist what God's doing. But the more I think about it, I think maybe we have a gas pedal too. And I'm interested in your thoughts on this, in the sense that we can hasten the coming of the Lord, right? Our faithfulness to what God wants to do, it moves God. You know, the Scripture talks about hearing the prayers of the righteous.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on? Do we have a gas pedal when it comes to things like this, or are we just waiting for the sovereign hand?
That's a good question. I think I have to agree with you, but I think the difficulty is you get into the whole larger question or category of questions in terms of man's responsibility and the role of his actions, and then God's sovereignty and the role of his actions. And that's always a tricky subject, no matter what topic you're on. And I've always liked Spurgeon's thing better when he says, why? Because those things can seem to be at odds. And he says, why are you fighting to reconcile friends? You should labor with all your might.
Yeah.
But it's God who does things. And don't catch me up into trying to figure out how those two work together. Just do them both. Know that they're both true. And there's a certain amount that I think in that. So I think, Abraham prays and it changes what happens to Sodom.
Yeah.
There is an appeal, and yet at the same time, yeah. So I don't know about the gas. Something in me doesn't like the gas pedal metaphor when you say we have a gas pedal.
Yeah.
I probably don't. But we certainly have something. I just don't know what to call it.
Right. Maybe we get to sit in the passenger seat and ask if we can go faster.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we have to start the car, or I don't know.
Right.
I'm certainly not inclined. I think you're right. I just think it's really hard to think about. It's just easier to be in one extreme or the other, to be really sovereignty oriented.
It's
God,
comforting.
God.
Yeah.
Or really, you need to labor.
us.
It's all you. It's just way easier to be one or the other. And as soon as you start thinking both, it's just difficult.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. It's not appropriate to do nothing.
Well, the example I was thinking of, I don't know where the verse is. The fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
And the example in that passage is about Elijah.
Yeah, that's right.
And so if you go into that story of Elijah praying for rain, you also run into Elijah saying, God, I'm the only one left.
Yeah.
I'm the only one working hard.
Yeah.
And God says, no, I've kept
Yeah. Yeah.
a remnant. And so there's sovereignty in the midst of effort.
Yeah, that's right. The one I like, my favorite one on that, which applies to this, is the Philippians 2, where it says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. So there's a command to do something and to do it diligently.
Yeah.
For what's grounding that? It is God who works in you to will and to do. Oh.
Yeah.
So we're called to do something, and yet that at all doesn't undo that God works in. God is what brings these things about. But you can't. The other thing I think about, the analogy is a stage. This is another podcast at some point. We look at life as a stage, and we live on this stage, and there's a back behind the curtains. And most of the Bible is written to us on that stage, and what to do, how to do it, what are the right motives, Behind the curtains, we have been given, when you stand at an angle, you can see a little bit behind the curtains, but not very much.
Yeah.
And God says, I'm back there doing everything. And I'll let the curtains be open just a smidgen so you can see. And I'm not telling you anything more. I just wanted you to know I'm here.
Yeah.
Now, when you're out there, go do da 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 da. So in that sense, I think we are called to step on the gas pedals, and yet we are reminded everything without him back there is nothing. It doesn't do anything.
Well, and we're in the second act, in the sense that if the first act, if a 3-act play is in the first act, you introduce the characters and you have one large victory. In the second act, all the plans that the characters fail, and at the end of the second act, it seems like everything is going to fall apart. And in the third act, the hero rises, right? And so, if in a sense, the New Testament is the first act, and now we're sitting in this second act, waiting for the hero to rise.
Yeah.
And it's like I was thinking about it in the sense of every movie about relationships, right? If it's about what happens before the wedding, it's a happy ending. If it's about what happens after the wedding, it's a sad movie, right? Movies about marriage are always terrible. Even if they're good, they're terrible, right? And then movies about the courtship. So why is that? Why do we long for the courtship?
Okay.
If not that we're waiting for the one.
Do you have a thought? Because I do.
I think it's our hearts long for Christ to return.
I agree. And Chesterton said this, all the story is caught up in Genesis 1-3,
Okay.
except the ending. We don't know it yet.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been told, but we don't understand it. Lewis said in writing about Milton's Paradise Lost, he says the best character in Paradise Lost is the devil. He goes, we just don't know what a righteous person is yet.
Yeah.
So we can write about evil better.
Sure.
And so I think that we are longing for, we are not in the end. We know it's coming. We've been told some things about it, but it's all anticipation. The court, in a sense, if you're talking Christians, we are the bride and the marriage feast hasn't happened yet.
Right.
We don't know what it is. We've just been told about it and given some illustrations.
Well, how much is it like, before you got married, in the innocence of youth, and depending on the innocence, it affects this story. But if the bride is prepared and made ready and yet doesn't know what marriage will bring.
Yeah.
Right. And
that's
we
right.
sort of have this anticipation. We have a fantasy about what it will be like.
That's right.
And yet when it happens, it's completely different.
Yeah.
It's richer and it's more difficult at the same time.
Both of them.
Because one of the things I resist in Christian conversation about the end of things, right, about heaven, is this concept that it's only paradise forever. Because it says in this age and in the ages to come. And it's not, heaven is not eternal, but rather heaven and earth are reunited. But yet there is an eternity of work to be done.
I think
and
development
so something is happening
I
in
agree
that
with you.
distant future, something meaningful and not just
We should have several
sitting on
podcasts at some
clouds.
point on heaven. I think it's a fascinating thing, but it is not a large worship service for eternity, in my opinion. I don't believe that's what the scriptures teach at all.
Well, I think there will be a worship service going on, but that doesn't mean you're going to have to sit in it for an hour or for a million years.
Is there any, I think, I agree with you, but then I think what it is it's cyclical, just like we have now. God made every seventh day in our current existence to say, all right, stop everything you're doing, good reasons or bad reasons, and give attention to me.
Yeah.
I think eternity has a rhythm like that, where there will be worship, but there'll be 6 days of work, so to speak.
Right.
But it won't be the work that is cursed like we have, etc.
Yeah.
So, on your the pre-wedding, a similar observation I've made and just marveled at is how in movies so the romance, we like the romance, but and your point is once the wedding happens, then another phase comes in and we don't like it as much in the movie even.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's the same thing with this and sex. So in a movie, we in the general large word, sense of the word, we like either adultery or premarital fornication. Rarely does a movie have two married people engaging in sexual interest in one another,
Right.
and we like it as part of the movie.
If it's there, it's just comedy.
That's right. It's
Right,
set up
'cause
for
it's so
other
laughable.
purposes.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's like, what is that? And it's not just a bad word. It's not just a bad, it is a bad approach, but I find it in myself. And I don't want to have a bad thought. And I think the reason is it's that proverb, stolen water is sweet.
Yeah.
There's something that we can't get rid of. The illicit nature has a draw for us. And if you show us this activity in the parameters in which God meant it, all right. Yeah, I agree. Don't disagree with that. But I'm actually a little interested. Oh, this is out. This is forbidden.
Well, what's funny too is because marriage gets a bad rap all the time, right?
Yeah.
People love to dog on marriage. People give it up on it. I heard somebody saying the divorce rate is going down, and all the Christians say, "Yay!" because we've been dogging on the divorce rate. But it's because people aren't getting married,
Yeah.
so they don't need to get divorced.
Yeah.
But what's funny is what's now happening in pop culture is that the romantic timeline or storyline rather is also fading. So Frozen famously was the big first Disney princess movie without a romantic central.
Oh, I never heard
part.
that. Never thought of it. And I've seen it a few times.
And it's sort of like they're giving up on.
Interesting.
We don't need no man, right? It sort of was the central idea.
We're
of
leading
that
into
movie.
our main topic here.
Yeah. Well, let's transition into it.
Yeah.
So, what is the Christian answer to the world's broken? I mean, I would argue broken picture of masculine and femininity.
Well, how about what if we said this? Where
Okay.
we were just starting to go, it just reveals a topic that is fraught with cracks and a fractured topic that are once, at least in my opinion, are once over a long period of time settled approach. That's not the right way to say it, but all the foundations are taken away and people are now scrambling about and they don't know what they're doing at all. It just reveals that there's something there to talk about, right? There's something there to establish that we've lost sight of because we have rejected in a sense God from a theistic perspective, not necessarily Christianity. I'm just talking theism. Our culture's rejected it. And as a result, we've rejected, even the old people would talk about the older culture, the good book. You know what? Not necessarily Christian, but the good, or the man upstairs and the good book.
Yeah.
It was just a common way to think about things. You accepted a certain baseline. When that's rejected, we've lost our way then when it comes to men and women. We've lost our way.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're talking about here is we could probably do 10 different examples of where we lost our way, and they're all going to funnel down to this. We've lost our way in this topic.
Well, so there's a lot of voices on this topic as well. I remember you reminding me of a summer I spent in college doing a historical reenactment in a huge Boy Scout camp, and they would backpack to our camp, and we were fur trappers from the 1842, right? And we're dressed in period clothing, and we had muskets and tomahawks, and one of the things we would tell as part of our like history spiel was that people in that era basically had two books. They had the complete works of William Shakespeare, and they had the Bible.
Yeah.
And so almost every frame of reference for our
Yes,
culture
that's
was
right.
those two
That's right.
works.
That's exactly
literary
right.
works. And now
Yeah.
it's 1,000,001 things, and it's changing
Yeah.
every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's the latest movie with the big splash. It's even advertising messaging is like
Yeah.
moral.
And it's left people bewildered, confused, and groping in the darkness and stubbing their toes all over the place, and it hurts.
Yeah. Well, I would say that it creates in relationships and marriage this sense of I'm going to get mine, right? And if I don't get mine, then this is unjust, and I'm out of here. And that's not how you build a healthy relationship.
So when you say that, what I hear you saying is without this other corrective component that its voice comes from Scripture and God, even if you're not a Christian, you don't realize that the force this plays in shaping you to say, I need to give in to this brother. We're in an argument and I need to say I'm sorry is a good thing, or to give up something I want, and maybe I think I could win this argument, but to sacrifice is a good thing. So we begin to give up on those things, is what I'm hearing you say.
I think there's part of that is like, how do we relate with each other?
Yeah.
There's also this sort of accepted premise of the dynamics of a marriage, that a man is the head of the house, that in an era where everybody sort of accepts that, you might have tension, you might have disagreements, but the foundation of that authority structure is in place. And so now that it's not in place, it's like the very basis of the relationship is up. It's up for grabs. You know? It might change at any minute.
Yeah, the rules have changed.
Yeah. And so it makes me think of, and my sons will hear this later and be annoyed at me, but I'm going to share their story. You know, we went to the grocery store, right?
Just don't say any names.
That's right. So we had brought the cart to the back of the car, and one of them said, well, I loaded the cart, so you have to unload it, and like got in the car. I was like, no, that's not the point, right? Then why can't we just we're trying to help each other, but instead, because as brothers do, right, of who's really in charge here, especially in their teen years, it becomes this battle of I'm in charge of you, no, I'm going to get mine, and screw everyone else.
And the one, you know, so I'm glad I don't know who said what or whatnot, so I can just talk about it without thinking of any person. But the one has a sense of justice. I did this, now you should, and so this is the baseline from which to operate.
And it isn't an unjust rationale.
It's not an unjust.
Right.
But Scripture provides another baseline, and that is, you know, serve other people, even, you know, to lay down your life even. And this would be far. And so when that, especially then when you get in marriage, I think you begin to get driven to big baselines, right? Yeah. Because you're forced to. I've often said that the two greatest things that have happened to me, and I think to most people, is when you get married and you don't realize how selfish you are. Right. Then you have kids, and you thought you'd realize how selfish you were, and you had no idea until you have kids. And you learn a lot about yourself. And it's actually really hard, but really good and beneficial. Right. Yeah. Well, here's one of the things I've been thinking about femininity is that there's a glory in it that I hadn't realized, or I shouldn't have said it that way. I should say this. I was working through the 1 Timothy 2 passage with some friends, and we were meeting, and it was all guys. So one of the things I asked was, how would we talk about this if there was ladies here? Would we talk about it different? Well, yes. Lewis famously noted that men are men when they're with each other, and as soon as a woman enters the room, they change. Yeah. And he goes, I can only suppose that it's the same for women, because I've always been the one interrupting. So
we had the same conclusion. We were reading Huck Finn. And one of the things we noticed was that, especially early on, but at the end of the book as well, the women in his life, his aunt and the widow who's adopted him, are very much trying to domesticate him, and he's resisting it wholeheartedly. Yeah. But toward the middle and end of the book, the two young women that he interacts with, who he finds quite attractive, suddenly he's behaving, right? And telling the truth and wanting to do right. Yeah. But then by the end, when he's lost touch with them, it's back to the older women and he's off. But we were talking about the civilizing effect that women have.
Yes, I agree with that. So we can't get out of our silos in a sense. It's interesting because as I was thinking about the passage and working through with these guys, how would we talk about this if there was 3 ladies sitting at the table with us, right? And well, number one, we would approach the passage with some additional caution. I don't want to be misheard. You know, I want to ask questions of the passage. I want to know what it says. I want to know how you hear this passage. And this is the passage where Paul's talking about authority and not to teach. And actually, it's the one that says silent. It has the word submissive.
Okay,
right?
So I could just read it. I got it up here.
Do you? All right. I brought it just in case.
It's my
only
take
a
on this
paragraph.
thing.
It's only a paragraph. But start with verse 8, because verse 8 starts with men.
Okay.
I'm convinced that it's male and female in this passage that are...
Well, so this is an interesting way that we look at these differently, because my stance on things like this is to first lay it out there cold and let people wrestle with it on their own.
We're going to deal with it different.
And then condition it after the fact, right? Whereas your reflex is to condition it a little early.
That's your little bit of profit.
Right.
I'll throw the cold water on you, and then I'll bring you a towel.
That's right. That's right.
I'm going to get the towel ready.
You want the sauna and then the cold plunge. I'm the other way around.
That's right. That's right. All right, go.
All right, so it says, therefore, I want men everywhere to pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or disputing. I also want the women to dress modestly with decency and propriety, adorning themselves, not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds, appropriate for women who profess to worship God. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet, for Adam was formed first, and then Eve. Adam was not the one deceived, it was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. Boy, that last one is the one I always want to skip. It was like, oh, that's a harsh one. That
Which
the childbearing, that like, because it's sort of like, it seems like it's just
It's a
saying, okay,
difficult
this is how the
passage.
authority structure should be laid out. But then it sort of adds in that motherhood is the central role of their life. And it sort of assumes things that our modern
So
culture with modern
that
birth
say through
control has
childbearing.
changed.
Then you have the formation. For Adam was formed first. Is that what your version read?
Yep.
And then the woman. So what happened? So there's a lot in this passage. Very interesting things. Like it starts with men, and I think the passage is about church and what God's doing with men and women.
Yeah.
And with men, the number one, I believe, difficulty that is male/masculine is anger. And so what's happening, and so men that get later in life or earlier, they have roadblocks, obstacles, things that, and it doesn't work out. And I think it has to do with they're made to go build and make and develop and create and initiate,
Yeah.
and it's failing. The ground is cursed and it's not working out. And they get to a certain time and they begin to feel angry. And so I think that's why it says here, lift up holy hands without anger. So it's saying in the gospel, you have to let go of the failures of this life and wait for another one and be at peace. And then I think in the women, you have the same thing, and then he transitions. And what's interesting about this is that it starts out, it goes on to some of the activities, but it starts out with beauty.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't figure out why was this, seems like a harsh, sharp transition. And I don't think Paul is a jump around kind of arguer in his letter writing.
Right.
He's got a flow and he's working with it. And then I began to realize, oh, well, in the same way that for men, achievement and accomplishment is an identifying core,
Okay.
and that is stopped up by the fall of the world, women, there is an element of being made beautiful, having beauty.
Yeah.
And then I began to realize, oh, because the difficulty with this passage, with this passage is really used poorly in a lot of situations, especially don't let her dress a certain way, don't let her adorn this, as if it is about jewelry.
But is it though?
I don't think it's about that.
No, what I'm saying is it really used poorly or is it mostly ignored? Because there's always a fringe conservative end of Christianity that's going to take everything to the extreme, but it's so small in number.
Okay, well that's the portion I was thinking about, because here's the thing: a lot of that is people who take the book really seriously.
Yeah.
Now I'm agreeing with you. There's a large swath of Christian individuals who they don't take it as seriously. They just don't. They just ignore this altogether. Yeah. So I agree with you.
That's a list of emails I don't want to get this week.
That's right. That's right.
So we're gonna skip over that.
That's the ones. But I still think when it's paid attention to, then that's often where people go, and I think that misses it. I think what it's talking about is, in the same way that men are inclined to become angry, women are, because of this failure of this core tenet to them, women are inclined to want to hold on to this thing that's going away.
All right, so that stirs something in me, and that is hanging out with teenagers as I do. Andrew Tate comes up a lot.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so if you look at the life of someone like that, who the way I would describe Andrew Tate is as a scoundrel and a cad and all the...
Okay, so you got some negative words.
Right, but
then there's the
he
but.
knows some truth.
That's right. I agree
And
with you.
what I was describing this to a friend of mine who was not just offended by Tate, but also like shocked and afraid of the influence he might have, right? Because his popularity has been growing.
Yeah.
And it's been waning somewhat as, you know,
He's a voice crying in the wilderness, and people are saying, oh, there's something there.
Right. But the way I described to my friend who was quite concerned was that if normal people say the truth, they get beat up. And so the only people now who are going to tell the truth are the people who don't care if they get beat up. And so they're jerks, right?
There's a certain insensitivity they've cultivated in order to say what's true.
Yeah.
Or speak some truth.
But the reason his popularity is not because he's a jerk, but because he's successful. And he represents what you're describing to the extreme, which is a masculine ideal of accomplishment
That's correct.
surrounded by the feminine ideal of beauty, right?
Yes, that's
and
correct.
to the extreme point that he actually, I didn't know this till recently, makes his wealth mostly from pimping women to be essentially prostitutes and
Yes.
sex workers online.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
what?
So it's a distortion.
So he's gone to the extreme of the masculine to the point of destruction of the feminine, right?
Well,
Or
so
exploitation.
I agree with you, but I think the reason what I would want to add to what you said is the reason he's been successful. Now, I shouldn't have said the reason he has an audience. I'll say
There you
it that
go.
way.
Yeah, right.
Is because he's not apologizing for what he's saying.
And he's
Men
not
and
lying.
women are different.
Yeah.
And they each, and so what I'm going to end up saying, where I want to end up going, is there's a glory in each.
Yeah.
That's, I think, in this passage that I did not see before when I was trying to wrestle through what is he saying about women.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the glory in men because I feel it, because I'm male. And then there's another set of reasons, which we'll get to in just a sec. But so anyway, the whole thing with women, and when I realized this, I'll tell you what it did to me. It made me feel incredibly sad. Okay? And so I want to say a couple things about that. One, we can't get out of our silos.
Yeah.
You're male and I'm male.
Right.
Now here's what's crazy about that. When we look at women, when we look at ourselves, it's like hearing your own voice on tape recorder. Nobody likes it. You don't like hearing your own voice. I hear you and I hear you on a recorder and it's the same.
Right.
I hear myself, it's different. We look in the mirror and everybody looks weird to themselves, right? You look at somebody else, and I look at you in the mirror and I look at you normal, it's the same person. We have a hard time getting out of when you're inside of something.
Sure.
So when we talk about maleness, we're talking about it as male. And so everything feels normal. And then when we talk about femininity or female, we're observers. Now we do know some things and we do see some things, but we're also not that. We see it from, if you want to go back to the Mars and Venus thing, it's Mars looking at Venus, but he can only look as Mars. And Venus
Mars and Venus are an interesting parallel too, in the sense that Mars is the god of war and conquest.
Yes, that's right.
And Venus is, what besides
Beauty
beauty,
and
what does Venus
fertility.
represent? Yeah, fertility, sure.
Yeah.
And so part of what I was thinking, because when I first time I read that and thought, okay, he's setting up an authority structure within marriage, right?
I don't think he's setting up. I think he's referencing what has already been set up, and I think this passage goes back to Genesis 2 and 3.
Yeah, and so because when I grew up in churches that were far more egalitarian than the church I go to now, or than even I agree with, they would basically skip right through these and say, well, that was cultural.
Yes, that's exactly the argument.
But Paul's very much saying this is foundational to creation.
It is
how
an
can you argue
impossible argument. It can't be.
Yeah.
He appeals to the creation.
Yeah.
That's not a cultural dynamic.
No.
So that's the dilemma is, let me say one quick thing before moving that, because I'm trying to just set up what I think is a revelatory component to this passage. But I think to get to it, you have to realize and be persuaded that he is talking to men as men and what they have, and then women as women and what they have.
Right.
And so I think their inclination is to extend their beauty. And here's the thing with men, I can look at men's anger and feel sad because I feel it. I can feel 53. I didn't feel it as much at 33, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not yet developed all the way. But you get to a certain age or certain obstacles and you begin to feel like this isn't working out. The desires and dreams. And so I can resonate with men and I can sympathize with why they would have angry, clenched fists.
Okay.
And I can see then why God says in worship, there's a new creation.
Yeah.
It's not all the way yet, but I'm telling you it's coming. And I want you to trust me and open those things up and raise them up and give them to me.
Yeah.
And that's actually a hard thing to do when you're angry, right? So I resonate with that. But the women, think about this. Beauty. What would it be like if in the way that you and I, achievement and accomplishment is like deep?
Yeah.
What if now this, and here's the dilemma because of our culture. It sounds like it could come across as shallow, but I don't think it's meant to be.
Okay.
I think it's meant as a glory of beauty.
Yeah.
I think God is beautiful. And
Yeah.
I think he put in woman beauty, in femininity, a beauty. But the sin and the fall begins to destroy it. That's
Well,
really
it's
her
the
being
difference.
destroyed.
You can be shallow in your accomplishments
Yes, that's right. It's
as
the
well,
same
right?
shallowness can go on the other side.
Because you can say, well,
That's
it's all
right.
about the money and
That's
the
right.
and the
That's
car
right.
I drive.
That's right. That's right. But it's different. It's different. So anyway, I was struck with, if I was a woman, would I feel, how sad would it feel that the very who you were made, you can't stop its erosion. It's
Sure.
going away and you can't stop it. And that's what I think the pearls and the things are. You're trying to put it at bay
Grasping
and make it what it used to be. And he says, don't do it. Just let go of it.
Well, and what I see too is, because when I read that, I don't read it as age, and maybe it's because I haven't read it deeply since I was younger, but I always read that to be that don't make the surface beauty that which you pursue. But right, he talks
I
about
think
the
that's in
beauty
there.
of a
I think
quiet
that's in
and,
it. Yeah.
and an inner,
Yes,
an
that's
inner
right.
beauty that you should cultivate.
But I think it's connected to age, because what happens is this. Okay, here's the reality. When we face difficulties, we suddenly see things we didn't see before.
Yeah.
We feel good about it, but we never would have seen them without a certain failure preceding it. It opens our eyes,
Yeah.
right? So the reality is that women, they can emphasize internal beauty as they begin to lose their external beauty more, because it's all that's there and available.
Right, right, right.
So I might as well say this is important. So I think the two go hand in hand. The discovery process is accelerated by the loss of outward beauty.
So as an educator, right, I studied mindset a lot. And one of the things that I really believe from my experience with kids is that when adults heap praise on kids for things they can't change, it has a destructive impact.
I actually read this in your book.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
I thought it was a good point.
so
Very
the
good point.
what are the big things we can't change?
Okay, so
how
it's
smart we are, how
wait,
pretty
wait,
we are.
Let's say that
Yeah.
again. By praising them for something they don't have control of, you're actually damaging them,
Yeah.
which could come as a surprise statement. Now, say why then.
Well, so because what it does is it creates an environment, a belief system within the child, that the thing I can't change, right? How pretty I am, how fast of a run. I mean, you can get faster, you can get prettier, but you're not really changing it. You know, how talented you are, how smart you are. Those are the things that get noticed, the things that adults care about, and I can't change it. So now what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to have to pretend. And you're creating two beliefs then. One, that I can't get smarter, which on a core basis is true,
There's
but
some,
that doesn't, that's not what matters,
Yeah.
right? If intelligence is how quickly you can pick things up,
Yeah.
it doesn't actually mean there's nothing anyone can't learn.
Yeah.
It's just how fast they're going to learn it, right?
Yeah.
So then if you begin to praise hard work, right, which is what we're saying, that inner
Yeah.
beauty,
Yeah,
it's also
that's
a
right.
deeper level of
right.
accomplishment.
That's right.
That like, oh,
That's
you
right.
you accomplished that in the face of hardship
Yeah.
matters more than someone who accomplished
right.
it in the face of ease, right?
Yes.
Because the effort, the character is
I
what
think
matters.
that's
And so when I
exactly-
read that, it's saying don't fall into the woman's trap
Yeah.
or the world's trap for women, that you have to preserve this outward beauty and that gives you value. Because it doesn't.
I agree with you, but I would probably say it different instead of the world's trap. Though I think that's true, I would say it's also what God intended, but is no more. Now,
So
not
we're
that they would
sensing
be
the
shallow.
brokenness of a world that is
Yes.
not how it
so
should be.
it's sin. So I think, had there been no fall, here's my personal belief: every man would achieve their heart's desire. It would take time. It would take work. I don't think
the ages
there's
to come,
instant. It's not
right?
magic. Heaven's not magic, and things are turned into. But heaven is achievement of all that you desire. Every man will be fulfilled in that sense, and I believe that every woman, without the fall, every single woman on earth would be stunningly beautiful,
Yeah,
outside and in,
right.
at every level, so that the fall has corrupted what God intended.
Yeah.
So in a sense, the man is angry. It's not necessarily wrong that he's angry. there is something to be angry about.
Yeah.
But if he holds on to it in a sense, then he's denying the gospel in the new creation. If he says that's going to come and replace this and live with me.
Okay, so
And
I
the
would
same with
twist
the
that a
women.
little bit and
Yeah.
say, it's not if we hold on to our anger, but it's if we then turn that anger on our family.
Okay,
right?
sure.
Or,
That's fine.
or we turn
Yes.
it on God.
Yes, leverage
And
it.
that comes back to that conversation that we talked about, I was having with my boys of let's make that anger fuel.
Yeah.
The world is broken. It's not supposed to be this way. But also look at what the corrupt people
Yeah.
of the kingdom of this world, right? The spirit of the age are doing to our kids. Get angry and then build something good, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. The same with the women part is I don't think it's wrong that she, okay, so I mentioned this to you the other day, a curious thing, and I've asked my wife and I don't really get a good answer, but it struck me the other day when women primp, right? They look in the mirror and they touch this and they do that, and sometimes look in and say, I have no clue what changed before they touched and what changed after. So what is it they're doing? What? And the question really was, against what standard are they judging that it needs to be touched or not touched?
Yeah.
And I don't know that
How
there's
much
an
of the
answer.
touching is subconscious?
Well, but even if it's subconscious, the point is still made. A woman's entire, I think they are geared, okay, in general, we'll come back to the in general statement, but beauty is a part of what they're made to be, and it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
Right.
But it can be twisted and become more important than what beauty through and through,
Or where beauty actually comes
and
from.
where it actually comes from. And the reality too is now that sin has entered into the world, this thing is corrupted. And so I believe in, you probably like this, but what are the charts, the bell curves, right?
Sure.
And there's a statistical element in bell curves that seems to just overlay with a lot of things, a lot of life.
Yeah.
I think that
Called a
has,
standard distribution.
yeah, the standard distribution's from the middle, and this is like, what, 40, 36 or whatever, some percent in the middle, and you get further and further, and the ends are the extremes. I think that happens with the way sin works itself out even.
Okay.
So that there are people born with excessive beauty. It almost seems like they're unmarred from the sins. And then there are other people, and genetically, there are defects and there's distortions and breakdown of the raw material.
Yeah.
And then the more you get to the middle, then, but the bulk of things, there's this middle ground where they're attractive, but that's not the same as stunningly beautiful.
Okay,
Or-
so I would I've noticed that as our culture veers off the cliff, right? I heard a commentator today saying Sodom and Gomorrah are looking at what we're doing and thinking,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
we're
yeah.
not that bad,
Yeah,
right? We just wanted to rape adult men.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like we weren't putting strippers in front of little kids, right?
Yeah,
But so as our culture veers toward believing these lies about masculinity and femininity, we also see a weird distortion of beauty,
yeah.
where the plastic surgeries and the disproportionate, right? And I remember this struck me, I don't know, it might have been 20 years ago. Somebody said, if you we look at the Renaissance paintings with nudity and think of them as innocent. And he said, now I'm going to take the Venus de Milo and I'm going to overlay, I'm going to just change the proportions of her physique to look like what a normal Playboy centerfold would look like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And suddenly you're like, whoa, that's pornography. Like it
Yeah,
just
that's
changed
right.
everything.
That's right.
And it's like the farther we veer away
Yeah.
into these lies about what makes a woman valuable, what makes a man
Then
valuable.
the very topic itself becomes distorted.
Yes.
You say the word beauty, and we don't even know if we know what we're talking about anymore.
Well, and then you get into, and my wife was talking about this, about as she grew into adolescence and saw this sort of rat race of male attention, right? She had her friends who were pursuing guys
Boy
looking
crazy.
at them,
Yeah.
right? She says, well, I don't want to be feminine, if that's what that means.
If that's what that means.
Right.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And and we're seeing that too.
Yeah.
On mass and to extreme
yeah.
levels.
Yep, yep.
Okay,
Okay.
so I
Go
got
ahead.
one
No, all
thing
right.
that I was thinking of.
Yeah.
About a year ago, I posted for discussion on my Facebook, what does it mean to be a man, right? If you're more
Okay.
manly, what does it mean?
Okay.
And in particular, I asked the question to women, what is it that you want your husband to have more of than you have?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I asked the same question on the other side, two men, because I think those would be the signals of what a kind of healthy masculinity would be, is that you're strong where she's weak, that she's fills in where you run out, right? But what I got pushback on from Christian women, one particular, an educator that I respect, is she basically was saying, well, we don't need to have this discussion. Just let kids be themselves. I said, well, that would work fine, except that the culture is actively indoctrinating them into what it means to be a man or woman, to the detriment of their health. Mm-hmm. And she didn't have an answer, but I was hoping for a discussion there.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right, because I think that when we introduce sin into the topic, then what God made is under assault.
Yeah.
And there are times when it is achieving less destruction and at times when it's achieving more destruction. Mm-hmm. But it's always been under assault.
Yeah.
So we look back at times, I think we can look at history in times when it was less under assault and times when more. And we're at a time of more assault.
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right. You have to, when you're under assault, you have to try to say what's true and real.
So thinking about this in terms of relationship, right? Because to me, where the rubber meets the road is, are your marriage is healthy? Is there a good balance between the strengths you each bring to it? And I think a lot of that health comes from saying, I'm at peace with my masculine nature and with her feminine nature. I'm not trying to make her more masculine, right?
Yes.
I'm not trying to say, why is she so emotional?
Yeah.
Right? And she's not walking around saying, why isn't he more sensitive?
Yeah.
We both understand each other and accept it.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think that that's a whole topic that I do want to talk about sometime, because I think men are becoming more unman and women are becoming more, or less, men are becoming more feminine, women are becoming more masculine. And I think there's something bad going on there, but not entirely bad.
And
So,
scientifically that's happening. Like physiologically.
I know it.
Like the male, fertility is dropping 1% per year for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So one of the things I thought, okay, let me do my glory idea and see what you think about it.
Okay.
This passage then, so working through it, the hands and the beauty, and then you get down, and then there's the teaching and authority and quiet, for Adam is formed, and then there's the childbirth. Mm-hmm. What I realize is that this language is pulled from the Septuagint in Genesis 2 and 3. And the Greek here, the same words are used.
Yeah.
So our little study group actually went back and worked through Genesis 1 through 3 so that we could just get this flow. And it was mind-blowing, honestly.
So you're saying that this passage we just read really lines up, even by topic by topic?
Not just lined up. The words are chosen. The words are taken from the Septuagint.
Okay. Yeah.
The verbs, some
Formed.
of the adjectives. Yeah, the word formed is one of them.
Okay.
It's the word where we get it, a plastic mold is where we get it. But it's the word. It's not the word in Hebrew, but it's the word in the Septuagint. And without getting into that too much, Septuagint.
Wait. So I just noticed this, and you're going to probably tell me this. So the promise to Eve is that your offspring...
That's right.
would crush the serpent's head. Okay. Right?
Yes.
So, and he's saying that very thing, that it's through childbearing that you'll be sanctified.
Okay. So that's one of the ties.
That's crazy.
So anyway, once I discovered that there was a big tie, we went back to this to think through what was going on. And here's what, and I approached this passage with this thought. This is a hard passage. And you and I are talking about as two guys in a room with a door closed. And if there's two women in here, I'm trying to be really careful as we talk about it. I would be even more careful. I'd be asking, how do you hear this? It's a sensitive topic today.
Right.
So I wanted to take that. What I began to realize is that what's being said when it says Adam is formed first, I think what's being said is that when God made Adam and Eve, the human species, he makes male and female.
Yeah.
Right? So we can begin to make some statements from this. Number one, that all of what we call femininity, let's say, so I think first of all, he forms the man and he puts into him stuff. Okay. He puts into him, he breathes into him a soul of life.
Yeah.
But let's call it also, he breathes certain traits or virtues or dynamics that would end up in certain places. Sure. And we know what some of those are, initiation. And we can even look at the biology of the man, and there's a physicality and a muscularity compared to, and there's an assertiveness, and there's a lead thing going on. When he puts into woman, he puts in a certain element of himself into woman along a different set. So if we get X, Y, and Z, do they get W, V, and X? Or, in other words, there's overlap.
Sure.
We share, but there are some differences. So that what I began to think through was, what's actually happening is woman, and when woman is made with a deposit of glory from God, and so are men. But when sin has come into the world, here's what's happened. Sin has made it so that the male glory, which is strength and physical and assertive, has been able to, in a sense, overlord. That glory is seen. So let's pause here and go back then Jesus. It's crazy to consider that a victory of war is by dying.
Right.
That's non-masculine way. No football game is done that way. No baseball game.
Hopefully not.
No realm of male sports and aggressive anything. You don't win by submitting yourself to your opponent. That's
Right.
not how you win.
It's not just dying. It's submitting.
That's
Yeah,
right.
Right. It's giving up.
So what I realize then is that Jesus wins a victory with a set of virtues or a display of glory that is the feminine kind. That when he put into women,
His glory is in the submission.
it's in submission, and it has always been even as a son. So he's male and
Right.
he's masculine, and I don't want to get too much into being the third person of the Trinity or the second person and incarnation stuff, but I don't think that, I think there is a glory in masculine things, but we see it easily in our sin world because it's a dominating thing, and its distortions are more visible. But there's a glory in a feminine world that has softness to it, that has submissiveness, that has encouragement and nurturing in it. And that is God also.
Yeah.
And so God says, I'm like a mother. I'm like a mother hen, right? And I don't want to get also into if God's male or female, because that's another half an hour. But I think everything that we know as male and female is in God.
So I think of this in terms of personality, because a lot of what you're describing is within the range, right? Thinking of this, the curve, the bell curve, and that scientifically there's a lot of overlap between the male and female within personality traits. And as I read the scripture, I see a lot of people trying to put their own personalities into Christ, like, oh, he's like me in this, or maybe maybe if you don't appreciate yourself, you're idealizing someone else, and you put right. But I think Jesus exhibited all the personality traits.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm
Which
in agreement
then
with
would
you.
express all of the traits that you're describing as masculine and feminine.
So I wanted to be careful not to go there just because it's a whole nother branch, and that is the balance of Jesus as a perfect, unsinned human being and as a substitute.
Well, but it also becomes that if we can all we can all see the way we should go by reading what Jesus does.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
And so if my gifting, you could say,
Yeah.
well, my gifting is more
Yeah.
administrative, or it's
Yeah,
more
yes.
persuasive, or it's more this or that. Everybody has something to learn from Jesus.
Yeah,
And so
that's
therefore,
right. I
if they
agree.
portray Jesus
agree.
as the consummate salesman and the flamboyant, outgoing,
Yeah.
charismatic leader, then the people who aren't that,
So we've talked about
feel
you
left out.
having a prophetic nature, right? We even did this. We flip flopped the sauna, the
Yeah.
cold. So you can see certain scenes that Jesus does and say, "Well, that's like me." And
everybody can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I have this element of shepherding, and prophet and shepherd. There's some overlap and some difference.
Yeah.
And I can see in Jesus as things as a shepherd and say, "Okay, I'm drawn to that. I see that."
Yeah.
So I agree with you. But I
But
think
do you think it applies masculine and feminine as well?
I do.
Yeah.
I think, okay, and here's why. So I think sin, my guess, right now I'm speculating, I'm going a little past what I think I can support in scripture, but
Okay.
I think that when he made male and female before the fall, masculine and feminine were aligned with male and female. There wasn't distortion and bent and separation.
Right.
But I don't believe that we can function with at that level. So we have to make a distinction of feminine things and masculine things, and they roughly overlap with males and female on the bell curve. But there are males who are more feminine, and there are females who are more masculine.
Right.
We fall across this curve probably by nature originally a little bit, but then it's distorted and exacerbated by sin.
Okay, so this leads me to the question I've heard a lot, which is how much should, if as a man you find yourself falling on a feminine end of spectrums around personality, how much should you fake it? How much should you push yourself to, there's a Bible verse talking about playing the man.
Yes, right.
And
That's
but
right.
then you very quickly, I think, in our age, get into questions of, well, what if your sexual expression and your this feminine homosexual
So,
masculinity
I think I know exactly the question you're asking, but I think it's not misguided is not the right. I think it's not the right question. I think.
Okay.
I think and this is my opinion.
Yeah.
I think a male, when you're male and born that way, you can't help but be male, but that doesn't mean you might not have elements in you that are feminine as an emphasis more than another male. So let's take the prophet and shepherding thing. So I would say that the prophet thing is there's a masculine element. You go
Okay.
and you stand against and you project out.
Well, and that's part of the wild man,
It's
right?
the wild
He's
man.
out in the wilderness.
All of that is masculine.
Wild honey and
The
locusts.
but I would say this: the shepherding, and I am of the opinion, I think you are too, that the pastoral office in a church is to be occupied by males.
correct, yeah.
But shepherding is a feminine
Well,
thing.
so
It
this
is a
gets into
nurturing
this.
and caring and taking care of. It's
Part of
You don't
what
like that?
No, I agree with you completely. I'm just thinking of the term pastor and the role that we have in our church design, and whether it's really what the Bible is even laying out, in the sense that we call everyone in ministry pastor, or at least if you did, everyone would understand, whether they're a man or a woman. But the Bible doesn't emphasize pastor as a particularly significant role, but one of several roles or gifts or ministries that you might have in the church. And so then I think it puts this emphasis on the tenderness and the caring, and to where people get to church and that's what they expect, right? They
okay.
don't-
I'm not following. Can you say it again from a different way?
Sure. Okay. So the word pastor is
Yes.
in the New Testament is barely used, right? Whereas elder, overseer, bishop are the significant bulk of the descriptions of leadership within a local church. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be leadership, but rather that we have, for some reason, and I don't know the story of it, put the pastor as the only role that we accept.
You mean we select out of the 5 words, we select that one as a primary one, and you're saying, well, it might not be the primary one.
Right.
describe this
I would
office.
say the Bible doesn't make it primary, but we have. And I think part of it is we've sort of said, well, we want ministries to be under a certain, like we've carved out what ministry means. And now if you don't fit in that, you don't fit in our church model. Whereas the Bible has several ministry types.
when
So for
you
example,
say
we say we
ministry-
don't want apostles, right? People who call themselves apostles are kind of weird and
Yeah.
self-aggrandizing. So we're
Yeah.
out of that.
Yeah.
And we don't want prophets because they have weird things they say and it's all, everything's a metaphor and give me a break, right? Let's get to concrete. So then we say, well, we want evangelists because we want our churches to get bigger. But on the day-to-day, we just want pastors and teachers. But that's not a complete model of the church.
I think, is it possible that we're talking about 2 different things here in terms of an office versus ministry? Because you kept saying that and then going to ministry. And when you jump in the word ministry, I agree with you. But if we're jumping in the office of pastor, then I would still say, I think what you're criticizing, I still think is biblical.
Well, I don't see, and maybe you can help this, because I've been raised to say there's an office and there's a ministry and they're separate, but I don't actually see it. I see the office of elder,
Okay.
but as to what the ministry of elder is, I mean, you're overseeing and protecting the faith, right? But is that only a shepherding role or is that an apostolic role? Right? Was Timothy an apostle? because we agree Paul was. So Timothy's overseeing multiple churches, and so therefore is that.
Yeah. Well, I think there's quite a few verses that would address, I think at least, shepherd the flock of God. That I probably wouldn't be on the same page with you as to how infrequently the word shepherd or
Okay.
pastor comes in.
Right.
Shepherd is the pastor word. I think it's probably it may even be more than the word elder, or maybe really close. But bishop is not as often, that's probably the least. But those three words, the presbyter / elder, or the shepherd / pastor, or the bishop, or overseer, episcopus.
Yeah.
Those three things, in my perspective, are synonyms that have slight differences but major overlap.
They're used interchangeably.
They're used fairly interchangeably, though I think with functional emphasis.
Okay.
But they are interchangeable, so that it's one office that all three of those occupy.
Yeah.
But I may be more shepherding, and another person may be more overseeing.
Okay, but
and another
at the
more
same, even further than that, we think of the role of the shepherd. We think of the painting of Jesus with a sheep over his shoulders, rescuing the,
Right.
leaving the
Yes,
99.
yes,
Which is totally biblical, of
right.
course.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we forget of David, young David, killing the lion and the bear. The role of the shepherd is also
That's right.
as
That's right.
a man in training, if not
That's right.
actively pursuing war.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And Paul even says he uses the shepherd, but he also uses a farmer
Right.
and
Athlete.
a soldier and an athlete.
Yeah.
And those are, and especially in the Timothy sections, he's talking to everybody, but there are at times when his emphasis is to Timothy as a leader in a church.
Yeah.
So
So
I
part of
agree
what
with
I'm
you.
trying to get to is
I
that
agree with
question
you.
we've sort of had sitting in the docket here of, is the pastor model broken?
Yeah.
And part of it is one of finances and how pastors receive their pay and how the church sees it as a service that rendered based on the the money they contributed, which I think is not how it's meant to be.
Yeah.
But also I think that we as Christians in the West, perhaps, or at least in the US, have said this is what it means to be a pastor, that you're this tender shepherd, right? Who kind of guides people, and everybody shows up to church saying, "Did I get cared for?"
But so
Versus, did
do you have
somebody
more-
beat the lion and the bear? Did
But
someone?
so I don't see the lion and the bear as out of that model. So let's take David. We know there's a story about a bear, right?
Sure.
There's some story because he tells it about
Yeah.
it. And there's a lion story apparently. There's I think a bear and a lion story.
Yeah.
But that wasn't very often. Did
Yeah.
it happen? Are those the only two times it happened in his life, or did it happen 3 or 4 times? So is he caring for the sheep over a 7-year period? And how many bears and lions does he deal with?
Well, so here's our perspective coming from living in a place where predators are basically non-existent, right? In other words, where we live in a natural world, you can walk out into the woods and feel like, wow, I'm really communing with nature. You don't have to go back that far in history and say you go out in the woods, you might die, because there are predators out to get you. And so I think it's probably more common than we realize.
Okay, so let's up it a little bit and say it happened more frequently than we would tend to think. Nevertheless, the bulk of his time is more caring, leading, watering, feeding.
Yeah.
It's
the mundane.
It's
the
the
routine.
mundane, and then all of a sudden, bang! There's a lion here.
And if you don't love the sheep, you're not going to do any of that well.
That's right. Because
including fight the bear.
Or what's the
Because that
whole
bear
thing
might kill
with
me, and
the,
these sheep can come and
the
go.
bear, but also the false shepherd that would come in and steal.
Sure. Yeah.
And so you let them ravage the flock because the hireling, right,
Yeah.
runs away and lets it happen. So I agree with that, but I've never thought of that as a lost element of shepherding, as if it was being overshadowed by nurture and care.
Well, and part of what I'm saying is that I think the role of pastor would be better supported, because pastoring is, as far as I can tell, I've never been a senior pastor. It's a lonely road, right? And there's a lot of drama behind the scenes that the parishioners don't know about. And if you don't love the people God's given you, it's gonna wear you down. But I think if you were to establish a board of elders that was more like a council of war than it was a counseling session, you'd get it would be a different level of success. I think that you'd find men in leadership strengthened and supported in ways that they're just not now.
So I guess my pushback on that would be, there's not much in the New Testament that attaches those adjectives,
Well,
right?
they're just the Timothy metaphors of the soldier and running the race
Fighting
to
a good
win it.
fight and running to
I
win.
mean, he's using
I agree.
a masculine picture to
I
say,
agree with that.
take your manly ambitions and
Yeah.
set them to serving
Yeah,
God.
yeah, I agree with that. I don't think that that's not there, but I think the bigger one that is there is you have these animals that are vulnerable, and you're supposed to take care of them and protect them.
But that also, like if you say, well, Paul's wrestling with wild beasts in Ephesus, right? He's setting his sights on tearing down strongholds. He's going to establish the authority of Christ in the council, in the court of Caesar, right? He's pushing, he's driving. And so if we look to the leadership of our church and say, wow, they're on the forefront of advancing the gospel and its impact on culture, and they care for us. Whereas what we do now is we say, well, they got to care for us, and if they have time, they could go do the thing.
Okay, so I would agree with that when you approach it from that perspective, but then I would add the wrinkle is, to me, the shepherding model is the advancing culture or the stronghold elements.
Yeah.
That the job of the pastor is not to be the warrior out doing that as much as it is. I mean, there's some of that, but as much as it is your people, come on, let's go do this thing together. And then go to somebody else, come on, let's go do this. With the mindset that I'm trying to get them to see this is what you should be doing.
Well, that's the Ephesians 4:12.
It is.
Right? It's
that's
the
what I'm
fivefold
paraphrasing.
Yeah.
Whether you call it fivefold or not, because I do think there is some of the element of theological, where do we find some of the names of ministries and whatnot. I'm personally open to them, but I don't, like Hayford said, Jack Hayford, Foursquare, Pentecostal, we recognize that there is no apostles like the first century. That was unique.
Yeah.
But we still think there's apostolic people.
Well, and
I think that was a prudent and balanced way to approach it.
And I would agree. I've been in ministry where I think apostle was overused.
Yes.
I think it became a self-aggrandizing term.
And you've probably been where it's never used at all.
Where it's avoided completely.
And it's avoided because it's not only the first century only.
Yes, right. And I don't see any. I don't see how that.
I don't either.
Comes. I do see there's. My conversations with Sam, our pastor, is there's capital A apostle and there's lowercase a, right?
Okay.
But what I also see is that
which is which.
Well, that the 12, or that
there's a capitalization.
The early
there.
church apostles
Yes.
had an authority that we don't have. I could say, okay, maybe that's true. They definitely had a role that we don't have, right? Especially in laying down of scripture. But I also think, because I would argue that apostle is just missionary, and I think missionary now is sort of in one way lionized as, wow, they really suffer to go over to Africa or wherever they end up.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're over there. They're not a part of what we do.
Yeah.
Whereas in the early church, I don't see that model.
I agree with you completely. I even think I could name people who they would say they're, who would be the funny one. Nobody knows who you and I are, so it doesn't matter to say this. I wouldn't have said your pastor's name, but I can say John MacArthur, right?
Sure.
Everybody's. But I think he's a apostolic. I think he's your lowercase a. Right?
What about Rick Warren?
I think Rick Warren is too.
He trained
I think John Piper. I think these guys who are sent and they go to their church and something more happens.
And they attack strongholds.
There is something more taking place.
Yeah.
And I think it doesn't even matter if you agree or disagree with things. You can not like certain. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. Yeah. The point is, I think there are apostles, apostles, but I don't think that's the same. But lowercase a. That's how I would say it too.
Yeah.
And I would say the same thing with prophet. Anyway, fivefold. That's a buzzword. When you say it fivefold, all of a sudden you've now taken on the octagon terminology of.
Oh.
But
wait, what do you mean by octagon? Do you mean like UFC?
The wrestling? Yeah. You've
entered the arena when you say that.
You've entered the arena.
Oh my goodness!
There is a conversation.
I didn't know I
went
in the Thunderdome.
Yes, exactly.
Well, but part of what I'm saying is like I do go to Africa, and a lot of the missionaries there are in their 20s. They have this ambition since youth of saying, I'm going to serve God no matter what. And there's a romance to it, but they don't last long, especially if it's a tough place, right? As far as physical comforts or the culture is very opposed. It's not the same. And then we send our teenagers to be missionaries, on these trips, and we spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to send 20 kids to Ukraine or South America. I went to South America when I was a teenager, in early college. That's not the same as saying we're going to take the leader of our denomination and send him on a 3-month mission to build a church in a remote and unreached place, which is what the biblical churches were doing, right? And to me, that's
You think of
that's real
Paul and
apostleship.
Barnabas being set apart
That's right, yeah.
in Acts 13.
And so it's not sending the young; it's sending the advanced, and leaving Timothy to say, "Look, build this network of churches here."
I still think that happens. There's the pastor in Silverton here, up at
It certainly does.
BBC.
It's not the norm.
He's
is what I'm saying.
he's letting go of his pastoral ministry because what's happening internationally, he's feeling like he needs to start giving more emphasis to that. But he's not leaving his church.
Well, and
interestingly
that
enough.
is exciting though, and I think I predict that in the next few years, if this Asbury move of God grows like I feel it will, that we will see more and more of these structures setting right. And the dysfunctional things will pass away. Part of what I see is when I hang out with the people who are most hungry for a clear move of God, they're also the most apt to tear down the church, to criticize it, and it's our fault, and it's the church, if only this, and our pastor, and it's like, you guys aren't building anything. You're just tearing down.
Okay, I'm interested. So we're probably
We're well over
we're
an
done
hour.
with no, we're not. Are we over time?
Yeah.
Oh, I turned my timer over too late then.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a quick question.
Are there any
We're
quick
done
questions
with.
around here?
I know, probably not. We're done with the second Timothy, but I want to come back and do some more another time.
Okay.
But because I spent too much time talking about the beauty and anger, because I didn't really mean to go there. But anyway, okay, so this is the second episode in a row where you've had a dynamic of advocating for. I'm going to use the word aggressive, but I don't mean it in a negative way.
I don't take it negative.
Yeah. So tell me, so when you had the question, we've seen it for a while, and we've said we're going to talk about it, and we haven't. Is pastor model broken? And we've only hinted at it from different topics, right?
Yeah.
So I made some notes for myself. I have some things and thoughts, but I had no clue your first thing you mentioned is this dynamic of shepherding versus this aggressive, entrepreneurial, warriorish thing.
Yeah.
So you've caught me by surprise there by mentioning that.
Nice.
And so that intrigues me. And then it came up in last time we talked, and I don't remember the context, but this same thing came up. Maybe we were talking about prophet. I don't remember now. But why? Are you saying? Is that what? As the heartbeat of this your question is the model of shepherding broken?
Yeah.
Is that the heartbeat of your answer? That it is a caring, nurturing thing, and not an aggressive
Well, I
storm
see.
the gates of hell kind of thing, which is biblical. So I'm not trying to say that and poo-poo it. Is that the crux of what you're thinking? Is that why you wrote the question? And
Part of it is I'm not sure. So I'm wrestling with this question.
because I have a
I
whole
wrote
list of other things that I think are broken.
I wrote it as a question because I see it. I see men who love God consistently set up to fail, or at least to live.
What do you mean by that? Set up to fail?
Well, to burn out, to quit, to financially struggle, for decades, to raise kids who resent the ministry. There's so many ways.
When you say men, you're talking about pastors.
Pastors.
Okay.
Yeah. And I say, well, what's wrong with this model? Because nobody, even Jesus sent them out 2 at a time, but for some reason we want one guy on a pedestal to represent God for us. And at the same time, I see that when they do fail, that there's all these believers shipwrecked, right?
See, I just have a totally different. I agree with what you're saying, but I have different reasons for why I think it's there.
Well, you've lived it a lot more than I have.
Well, that's not why I was saying it. So when you said lonely, I just let it go, and I saw it, and I thought about addressing and taking up and then what you went to is a group.
Yeah.
But then you also made it a group of like warriors or an assault team.
Council of War. Yeah.
A council of war. That was your phrase. Not just counseling, right?
Yeah.
And that's what has struck me as interesting, because that's not what I have thought. But same problem, the lonely thing, the burnout thing, all that. But I've never thought of it in terms of the solution or the error or the fault or the broken thing is the council of
dynamic.
war.
Yeah.
That dynamic.
It's the solution I'm wrestling with right now. I've been struggling with it for several years, not in the sense that I've always said, well, something's up there, but also that I feel now in the position that I'm in, as we could build something that would avoid some of these traps, right? In the way that we lead church and the way that we plant churches, and then vocalize that to people as they do as well. But I don't want to just throw out ideas. I want to look at it carefully. So part of my instinct now is, we are in a culture war. A lot of pastors that I see are put in positions that make them vulnerable are also avoiding the culture war. And so I'm sort of thinking, well, I wonder if there's correlation there, maybe causation.
Yes. So we're back. That's what it was when we said it earlier. We're back to our question where you and I have some different perspectives, but we made it a little ground last time. But
Yeah.
That is what does engagement with the culture war, how central, or I don't know what we call it. You see a centrality to it that I might not see.
Well, I also
so
see it
what
as
is that?
masculine. That if like we were saying, that's how we got into this, is if the role of elder and overseer is meant to be held by men, as seems clear in the Bible, then there must be something masculine particular about that role. That if we feminize the role too much, we create dysfunction unintentionally. And I mean, our culture is generally feminized, right? Especially, I would argue, in Oregon more.
So how do you think of Paul? Because basically it's the preeminent pastoral. I mean, we know a little bit about Timothy.
Yeah.
But it's only from Paul talking to Timothy.
Yeah.
We know a little about Titus, and that's about it. We know a little bit of Peter, but he transcended his pastoral really fast. Became international or interchurch, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So Paul is the only one because he cares for a few of the churches, especially Corinth and Galatian, the Colossae ones. But he's our really only model. So how would you view him?
On the masculine feminine?
Yeah, your
scale?
council of war versus.
I mean, so he definitely cared and understood that the only thing that lasts past this life is the people that you invest in, right? And so in that way, he was very shepherding. But I see him as trying to squeeze every ambitious accomplishment he can out of life. I see him as incredibly masculine.
I agree with you, but I would never probably replicate your words about a council of war as Paul.
Yeah.
I do see this great ambition to work hard and to lay a foundation, he says at one point,
Yeah.
right? To go where the others haven't gone. In fact, at one point, he's aware of something, virtuous or not, we could debate. He says, I worked harder than the rest.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Interesting phrase. At the same time, he says, I was like a nursing mother amongst you.
Right.
I was gentle and caring.
Yeah.
To the Corinthians, it's astounding how confrontational and how caring he is in the same
So
letter.
I see his caring. He was ambitious to care for people as much as he could. Do you know what I'm saying? That's how I read it, in the sense that part of when he says I worked harder than all of them is also to say I suffered more than they did, right?
Well,
because I went where the lions were, and you guys built the roads and the schools while I was pioneering. I'm not going to lay a foundation that someone else has already
But
started.
see, when he suffered, I agree with you, he suffered, but I don't think he sought out suffering. I don't think it was a warrior going to war. I think it was in his path and he couldn't avoid it. And he says, woe to me if I don't preach the gospel.
Well, so that's true.
I thought we were going to die at one point.
But woe to me is saying,
If I don't
I
preach
read that
the
as
gospel.
mimicking Jeremiah, right? That it's like a fire in my bones.
Yeah, I agree.
So I have to let it out.
Yeah.
But what he's also, like when I read toward the end of Acts, where he's going to Jerusalem, and even the Holy Spirit is saying, don't go. And he says, no, I'm going to go.
Now,
I've
what do
set
you mean?
to go back to Jerusalem so that he can represent Christ to Caesar. He knows he's going to get arrested. He knows he's going to get flogged and beaten and tortured.
Now I don't. So I realize now what you're saying. The Holy Spirit said it was another prophet who said it was the Holy Spirit. But
Yeah.
it's debatable. We don't necessarily know if that's the case or not.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, maybe I know your tradition
I would
and
take it at
background
face
is different
value.
than mine. I know.
Yeah.
My background tends to say the prophet said that, but Paul doesn't. It's not the same as the Old Testament. The New Testament prophet is not the same as the Old Testament. Thus says the Lord, and you're bound to obey. Paul felt at liberty to say, "I hear your prophetic word. I think I'm going to do this instead."
See, I read that and I think of it like Abraham looking down at Sodom and Gomorrah and having this negotiation with God, where Paul is
interesting. I
being
see what you're
spoken to
saying.
by the prophet, and the prophet doesn't say don't go, but he says this is what will happen.
Yeah,
the
he
Spirit
binds them up.
says,
Yeah.
this is what you're going
Yes,
into.
that's right, that's right.
And then he says, the prophet, so don't go.
Yes, that's right.
Right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So that's why it's disputed. The Spirit, where does that line stop and start?
Because soon afterward,
And it's what happens
Jesus
to him.
appears to him and says, I'll be with you. Go
Yes.
speak, right?
Yeah.
And so, but what I see there is this saying, this is where the nest of vipers is. This is the headquarters. I'm going to the.
I agree
I'm
with
going to
you
the heart
on
of it.
this. Yes.
That's an ambitious.
Yes.
That's a council of war, and that's what those.
I agree with you on that one.
That's what
Yeah.
if you were in that meeting with those prophets, in that prayer meeting
Yeah.
where Paul's passing through your church, that's a council of war, and that's the Holy Spirit right in the midst saying, "What's next?" Because we're going to conquer this world. We're not going to stop.
Okay, how did we get to this topic from?
The masculine and
Masculine and
feminine
feminine.
role
Yeah.
of ministry.
It is how we got, and which I think is kind of interesting. It shows, I think, that there is a lot to the topic of femininity, masculinity. There's more. It's not a simple thing. It's not a simple thing because
We didn't even get to battle of the sexes.
I know. I was thinking about that. That's okay. We'll do this again.
That's right.
The topic
We're allowed to cover every topic twice because it's called On Second Thought.
on second thought. Yeah, these are supposed. The first is supposed to be our second thoughts. All right.
Okay. Well, hey, we are at an hour and 20. We're past time, but we appreciate anybody listening. If you have any thoughts or anything you want us to speak about twice, put it in a comment. Send it to us even as an email. If you can find our email, I'm sure you could look at it online, wherever emails are sold. But we appreciate if you would share. If you like what we're doing and want more of it, you could even leave a review on one of your favorite podcast platforms. So until next time, I don't know. We need a catchphrase.
I know.
Until
We need a
next time.
closing phrase.
I mean, we hope we're helping. I'll say that.
All right, we'll go with that for the moment.